Sometimes being set apart feels like being torn apart. But our job is not to change the circumstances of life, but to honor God in the circumstances that we find ourselves in.
Amen. I know a lot of you smiling right now because you're like, I don't know if I could have taken another one of those bumper videos. That's what I felt, so we changed it. Anyways, we're in the series of Set Apart in Genesis 43 and 44. So if you have your Bible, open it. If you have the YouVersion, I hope you watched that video. Just click on the YouVersion. You can open up the text, and then on your live event, just click on it, and you should see these notes. What I did this week that was helpful for all of those who want the notes on YouVersion to use it is when I got to the notes, the live event, I just clicked on my personal notes and went ahead and forwarded it to my email. That way, when you send it to your email, you have not only the notes there in front of you that I'm writing, but then you can also type inside of them. If not, you can only look at them and then type your own notes. You can't see them at the same time. Either way, Genesis 43 and 44, as we are surprised by grace. I love that. That's the book title of a book that I read, written by a guy named, now get this, a guy named Tullian Tchividjian. You try to spell that, you come see me in the guest room, you get bonus points. I don't know what you get with your bonus points, but you get them anyways. Either way, Tullian Tchividjian wrote Surprised by Grace as a believer after he'd gone through some really tough circumstances in his life. He felt like, maybe like Joseph did, that he was just being torn apart. And he was so disappointed in his own failures and the failures of the world. And then the gospel came to him for comfort. See, it was his emotional reaction, realizing the gospel, and he learned the gospel even more from the book of Jonah. And he realized that all these terrible events that were happening in his life, Tchividjian realized that it wasn't because God hated him, it was actually because God loved him. And all these things happened in his life just to push him as a believer to the gospel. See, once Tchividjian realized, by the way, he's the grandson of Billy Graham, once he realized that the gospel was meant more than just a presentation that you give to an unbeliever, it meant more than just something he accepted, the good news he accepted in salvation. Once he realized that it was for every day, it changed everything. For you and for me. Once you realize that gospel message that Paul defines in 1 Corinthians 15 as the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, once you realize that message is more than just a 5-minute presentation that you give to an unbeliever just to evoke the sinner's prayer out of them so you can feel good about yourself, it changes everything. Not just for the unbeliever, but for you as the believer. Daily strength, daily power, daily hope. And it'll become more important to you than all the self-help books that I know you're already reading. Have you ever wondered why the bookstore has so many of those self-help books? I'm convinced it's because we don't, as believers, rely on the gospel. Well, the rest of the world doesn't know the gospel, but you don't rely on the gospel, so what happens? Someone writes another one. They keep getting published, and they'll continue to get published, and you'll continue to seek happiness and strength and peace and comfort through every book that comes out on the market because you're going to be searching for it until you realize that peace, that comfort, that strength, that hope comes from a message that's already been preached 2,000 years ago. It's the gospel. It's Jesus for you. It'll far surpass any book that you can read. Today, we see a beautiful picture of one very important aspect of the gospel. Several, but one clear picture of the gospel that makes Christianity different than anything else. It's called substitution. Today I pray from this text, from the life of Joseph, if you're sitting here just anguishing in life's failures, that you would remember that only God can change the heart. And the power that he has to change your heart or anybody else that you know is because of the substitute of his son. That picture is not just in a New Testament message, which I've preached before. It's right here in Genesis 43 and 44. As we open up Genesis 43, and I hope that you're there by now, what you find as I catch you up is what you would expect to find. You find Joseph's brothers and Jacob's sons arguing with him. But to get us to that point, you need to realize that Joseph has been on a long journey to this point. In Genesis 37, he was the favorite son of his father. The brothers hated him. They sold him into slavery. When they decided not to kill him, he takes that journey as a slave to Egypt and is a slave to Potiphar, where he's falsely accused, gets put in Pharaoh's prison, meets the cupbearer, he meets the baker, interprets some dreams, gets forgotten about, is remembered by Pharaoh, interprets his dreams. Pharaoh raises him up to the second position in Egypt and all of the world. And at this point, last week, he is just doing his job. And all of a sudden, Joseph comes face to face with the very brothers, the very people. You have people in your life like this, by the way. The very people that caused him the pain for the slavery and all. God used it, yes, but he sees those very people face to face. And before he connects the relationship, what you're waiting for, sorry, the cliffhanger, it's going to continue. We don't get reconciliation today. It's okay. Before he enters into that reconciliation process, he gives them some tests, and they fell miserably. You remember, test number 1 he gave them is Benjamin alive, and you probably think, well, they passed that one because Benjamin is alive, but that just set up the next ones because Joseph realized that there's no leader among them. No one stood up. No one is willing to sacrifice for the family. Yes, Benjamin may be alive, but there's no one willing to sacrifice. There's no leader. No one is willing to stay in Egypt as a prisoner. No one is willing to go back to Canaan alone. And when they finally, the 5th test, they take the journey 200 miles back to Canaan with all the grain that they have. Their family, their father and their brother still shows that they don't trust them. In all aspects, they're a huge failure. As we enter in today's text, you would probably realize if you have your thinking in the flesh hat on, like I usually do, right? We forget sometimes we're in a spiritual world and heaven's our home, so we walk around with our thinking hat, but it's in the flesh. You would probably expect, if you don't know the story of Joseph, in Genesis 43 and 44, for God to finally punish the brothers. They're going to come back and God's going to lay it on them. Finally, in Genesis 33 and 34, with your thinking in the flesh hat on, you're probably thinking that God's going to finally punish Jacob for being a horrible father. But you don't find either one of those things. What you find is surprising. What you'll find is if you put yourself in the story and you're actually living it, what happens in these chapters is mind-blowing. It's unexpected. What you find is the surprising God Almighty, El Shaddai, shows mercy and compassion. He changes the heart. What you find is that God is relentless in pursuit of those who are both sinners and those who are saved, those who are set apart. It's an encouraging message. And so now as we've caught up to Genesis 43, and I'm going to take us all the way through Genesis 44, but please take notes and read this afterwards because I'm not going to even get to look at every verse. Jacob's sons are there arguing with him again. This is how the argument started. They were there, back from Egypt with the grain for a period of time long enough to eat all the grain. Guess what that makes them? Hungry again. And after their family is hungry and starving, the leader of the family, the patriarch, as his sons are still living at home, and he's the man, he says very casually to his sons, we're out of food. Why don't you go back and buy us some more grain? Oh, that sounds so simple. It's like me telling somebody, one of you, hey, just go to Brookshire's and get some eggs and come back. The problem is it's not that simple. 1, it's a 200-mile journey. 2, the brothers knew how dangerous it was for them to go back before Joseph. I mean, if they went back, before, they don't know he's Joseph, to the Egyptian iron-fisted ruler without Benjamin, they're thinking, we're going to die. Or, he's not going to give us any grain. Either way, it's a lot more than just saying, hey, just go get some grain. But what's even more surprising than any of that thus far is the person who speaks up in response to his father. The brother that steps up and says, I'll be the leader. Now that should surprise you. His name is Judah. Judah steps up as the leader. Steps up to speak to his father. And says, no, we got to go back. Judah, the same brother in Genesis 37, when Joseph was about to be killed by the other brothers, he doesn't step up to save Joseph. He says, listen, if we're going to kill him, let's make a profit off of his life. Let's sell him into slavery, and then we'll have something in our pocket on the way back. That Judah. The same Judah who in Genesis 38, after Joseph was gone, continues to live in unfaithful wickedness, moves to a pagan land, marries a pagan wife, has 3 sons. The first 2 were so wicked, God destroyed them. The first one had a wife. And in that same chapter, Judah, who now stands up as the leader, slept with his daughter-in-law, thinking she was a prostitute. That's surprising to me. So let's look at how Judah responds to his father. Some unexpected change starts to happen here. His father, first of all, responds to him, says, "Why are you treating me so bad? Now you want to go back and you want to take Benjamin? Why did you even tell the Egyptian that you had another brother?" Of course, Judah responds, "Well, because he asked me." We don't see that in the text. I don't know if Judah is embellishing a little bit like you and I do when we're trying to convince our mom or our dad or our wife that we want something really bad. Or we don't have the whole picture earlier in Genesis 41 and 42. Either way, what surprises me is that Judah keeps pushing. Not only to go back to save his family, but look at the words that he says. He says, "Let me take the lad." Now, Benjamin's not a lad, a little baby boy. He's in his mid-30s. But what that is expressing is this youngest son that you care about. He's using a very emotional term that you'll see throughout the chapter. He says, "Let me take him. I'll take responsibility for him." He says, "By the way, if I don't take him and we don't go, guess what's going to happen, Dad? We're all going to die. Not just us, but the next generation. Your grandchildren, Jacob, Father, they're going to die too." See, Judah knew that death was coming for the family if they didn't do something. Let's say he went to, they don't know he's Joseph, but let's say they go to Joseph, this iron-fisted Egyptian ruler, and they don't have Benjamin. Well, could Joseph, like we talked about last week, could have just killed him. Why would he be patient this time? Or if he didn't kill him, what could have happened? Joseph could have said no to his brothers and sent him back without grain. And what would that have caused? More famine, and the brothers would have died, their dad would have died, and all the children would have died. He's like, "Dad, this is a big deal, but let me continue. Not only am I pleading with you for our lives and the life of our family, but look at Genesis 43:9, the most surprising thing you would ever expect. He says, "I myself," Judah's speaking here, "will be surety for Benjamin." What? He says, "You may hold me responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, let me bear the blame before you and even God forever." Judah's offer is amazing. He says, "Take my life as collateral for Benjamin." Something that's totally out of character for him. What's even more surprising is look at what Jacob says. He has a change of heart and he says, "I take the deal." Judah says, "I will be collateral for him and you can hold me accountable." Kind of like when you go to the bank and you want to take out a loan for maybe whatever, a car, a new Xbox, a house. Usually they want some kind of collateral, something you're willing to give up to show them that you're serious about paying off that note. For example, if you go to buy a car and you put up your house as collateral, if you don't pay the note on your car, what do they now own? Now, it could own your house if you're that silly to do that. Or if you go to one of these title loan places and you put up the collateral of your car so you can go buy the new Xbox, if you don't pay the money back plus a bazillion% interest, what do they now own? They now own your title. It's collateral. That's a perfect word. That word surety here, "I will be surety for the lad," is a financial term. It means to literally be collateral for. Or even ransom is a good word. Or to make an exchange of. For some reason, Jacob has the change of heart and he takes the deal. Jacob allows Judah to take Benjamin back to Egypt. Not only that, but he jumps in on the plan. He says, "Listen, suddenly his heart's changed. It surprises me and it should surprise you." He says, "Not only that, but take a gift with you. Here, take some of these things that we have in our land," which by the way, we could be eating because we're starving, "but go ahead and take them and let it be a peace offering between you and this Egyptian ruler." So Judah, the unexpected leader of his household, goes back with his father's blessing and a peace offering to the Egyptian ruler, which he doesn't know is his brother, with some slaves and some more sacks of grain. Now, before we get into that second interaction, let me rehearse for you again why this is so surprising. Number one, the surprising leadership of Judah. Not only should it surprise you because nothing in his character shows you that he shouldn't act like this, but who should have been the one to step up as the leader? Reuben? Why would I say Reuben? Because Reuben is the oldest brother. Therefore, he is the natural leader. We've seen Reuben speak up before. And if it wasn't going to be Reuben, who's second? Simeon. Where's Simeon? He's in jail. He's in Egypt, so he probably thought his brothers forgot him about it as well. But before Judah is another guy. His name is Levi. Not any of those guys step up. One's in prison. I guess he has a little bit of an excuse. But Judah steps up and offers himself in place of his brother. Now, let's go back and look at how Judah's offer is actually better than Reuben's. You remember earlier, Reuben, when he came back the first time to meet with Jacob, Jacob says, you're not taking Benjamin. Reuben says, well, take my children if I don't bring him back. He offers them children. It's a half-hearted request. It wasn't himself, it was his kids. Then let that remind you of why Reuben wasn't really serious about leadership. He was kind of half-hearted in all of his vocal commitments. You remember in Genesis 37, Reuben was the one that spoke up and did a good thing by saying, don't kill Joseph. Remember Reuben saying that? But it was half-hearted, because if he would have meant that, he wouldn't have just said that. He would have put himself in place of Joseph and says, listen, if you're going to get to Joseph, you got to go through me. We're not doing this. That's leadership. That's a friend. Greater love is no man than this, than a friend be willing to give his life for another. That would have been real commitment. Or what about in Genesis 42 when Reuben speaks up again? Remember they're having their holy huddle when Joseph is looking for a guy to stay? He says, which one of you will stay here in prison while the rest of you go back to get your youngest brother Benjamin? Then I'll believe that you're these honest men that you say you are. Instead of Reuben volunteering, he probably pulls the huddle together, and what we see him say in that holy huddle sounds a lot more like I told you so than a leader. He says, I told you this would happen. We should have never let this happen. Now the blood is upon our shoulders. Well, you could have prevented it earlier by being a real leader, by taking the place of Joseph. Or you could have stood up just then in the holy huddle and stopped the conversation and says, none of you are speaking. I'm the oldest brother. I will stay. Take me, Joseph. But he doesn't do that. Nor does he do it when he talks to Jacob. He says, take my children. Don't take me. The difference is Judah was committed. Judah was willing to give his life. And therefore, he's a beautiful example of the greatest leader ever to live. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now let's look at not only Judah's surprising leadership, but think about Jacob's surprising love here. Now, Jacob, I've told you several times, and I keep apologizing to Ryan and Lauren because they're naming their son Jacob. But I throw Jacob under the bus like every week. I say stuff like, he's a terrible father. That's harsh, but he was. Now, suddenly, in Genesis 43, the Bible calls Jacob another name. What's that name? Israel. Why does Moses, who, by the way, wrote Genesis, if you have any doubts about that, come talk to me afterwards. Moses is writing this book, and he says that Jacob's name is Israel. Why? Because maybe for the first time in a long time, Israel is finally Jacob, or Jacob's finally acting like the patriarch and the namesake for God's chosen people. But not only that, notice what he calls Simeon and Benjamin and everybody else. He calls them his sons. Earlier, who were the only two that he would actually vocalize were his sons? Joseph, who he thinks is dead, and Benjamin. Those were the two sons of Rachel, his favored wife. But now he talks to Judah and he says, go get your brother and take your brother Benjamin. He sees them all as his sons. All of them are brothers. Then look at what he says in Genesis 43:14. He finally starts trusting in God again instead of some great human schemes. He says, may God Almighty, the Hebrew there is El Shaddai, grant you compassion in the sight of the man, meaning the Egyptian ruler who he doesn't know is Joseph, so that he will release to you your other brother, Benjamin. What? What change happened here? He says, as for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. In this one simple statement, Jacob shows this miraculous change of heart. Number one, he says, I pray that El Shaddai goes with you. He trusted Yahweh to go with him. Now, we don't really know what El Shaddai means. I did all kinds of research to that on this week. I looked in lexicons. I looked up what we do know is it probably means something like the God that is powerful on the mountain who shows mercy. Something like that is what El Shaddai means. That's exactly what Jacob's family needs. That's the kind of God that they need right now. A powerful God that can do something miraculous to show mercy in the situation. They trust that God again. And he calls all of his sons, and all of them brothers. And then he has contentment with God. Would you ever expect the favoritism guru, if you will, of Jacob, who only cared about Joseph because he was favored, and now earlier only cared about Benjamin because they were two his favorite sons? Would you ever expect him to say, If I am bereaved of my children, then I am bereaved. You go. May El Shaddai go with you. No. But he says, whether my sons come back or not, I believe God can do it. But either way, I trust him. I'm content. So I ask you, what caused the change in Judah? I mean, a 180. What caused the change in Jacob? I mean, he did a 180, completely different. Nothing in their life thus far has showed us that they were willing or had the capacity to make any change. I would love to give you, and I'm tempted to tell you how Judah responded to Jacob to make Jacob change. And then how Jacob responded to Judah to make Judah change. But I'm not going to do that because I don't think it's that complicated. God changes the heart. I believe we don't have the circumstances of why God changed the heart so that we can sit and revel in the reality that only God changes the heart. Not you pleading, not you beating, not you screaming, not you crying, not you wailing can ever change the heart of another human. Yes, give your best effort. Do all that you can. Give your life. It's a beautiful example of Christ. But when none of that works, take what should have been option number one. Talk to God about it. Because God's the one that can do something about it. In a very close relationship in my life, I tried to do a lot of changing. For years, I was right, by the way. I won't go into all the details. But I felt like I was right, and I was right. These things should be happening. And I just pleaded for change, and I led with change, and I started demanding change, and none of that changed the heart. But then I got on my knees, and God gave me peace when the change didn't happen. Number one, that's pretty important. Number two, he made the change. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, what a wonderful message that is, that God changes the heart. So let's get to the second interaction as we go from verse 15 of chapter 43 all the way through verse 32 of chapter 44. I'm going to see if I can do this. Hopefully I won't talk too much faster. Either way, Joseph here sees his brothers coming from a distance. And what does Joseph do? He tells the servant, listen, go kill an animal and prepare a meal. For today at lunch, we're going to celebrate. In his heart, he was probably thinking, my brothers have come home again. Now, that was how he felt. Don't let it pass you by that that's a lot like the prodigal son parable in Luke 15. Do you remember when the father, who was a representative of God, sees his wayward and lost and sinful son coming down the road? Does he first think punishment? No, he doesn't think punishment. He thinks celebration. He tells the servants, kill the fatted calf because today my son has come home. We're going to celebrate. I love how that picture is illustrated here. But the brothers, they don't know he's going to react like that. They react like the prodigal son did, like they should have, which blows me away. They don't come in arrogance. They come and they fall on their face, and the first person they see is Joseph's servant. And they just come clean. They said, listen, we messed up. We brought double the money this time because last time you probably thought that we stole it. We didn't. We are humbled. Please don't kill us, basically. And what Joseph has his servant tell them is so comforting. He says, take comfort. Be at ease. The God of your father is with you. Don't worry about the money. That money was a gift from him to you. Your God gave you that gift, and we have your money, so don't stress out. They're like, okay. A little shocked. They step back, and to further exasperate their shockedness, if you will, they bring Simeon. Joseph has Simeon, their brother, that they didn't know if he was alive or dead. We don't see a reunion and not a lot of celebration. I'm sure there was. They probably hug it out. Anyways, now Simeon is reunited with all of his brothers. All 11 of them are there. They think Joseph's dead, but what a beautiful picture that is. And then the servant goes beyond that, and he gives them hay and fodder for their animals, and he gives them water to wash their feet. And then he says something crazy. He says, why don't you all 11 of you, come in and let's have lunch together so you can celebrate with, they don't know his name, I don't know. They probably called him Zephaniah Paneah, his Egyptian name. So they're shocked. They're probably still scared. And as they go in to eat, they get the gift that they brought already. They have all of it laid out. Just when the ruler comes in, he can see that they truly want to make peace. And then you have Joseph. He enters. And he doesn't even look at the gift. He looks right at his brothers, and he talks about what's important to him. He says, how is your elderly father? Is he still alive? They give him surety of that. That probably chokes Joseph up the first time. And then he says, Benjamin, his brother that he didn't know was alive. He didn't know if he could trust these guys. And overwhelmed by the situation, he gives a blessing to Benjamin. And he's so overcome by the reality that they came back, that they're unified. They brought Benjamin, and he's seeing Benjamin. He breaks down, but he doesn't let them see it. He turns away. He doesn't have to explain himself to them. And he runs off to his quarters, and he just weeps for joy. He probably praises God, finally. And he cleans his face up, and he comes back, and he says, let's have dinner. And they're probably still shocked, but as they're eating dinner, they start looking around and realize that they're seated in the exact order of their age. And the Bible says that takes them back. Why would that take them back? They don't know that he's Joseph. They just think he's some just Egyptian iron-fisted ruler. How would this Egyptian know which one of us is older all the way down to the 11th one, which is youngest? He could probably easily got number 1 and number 11 right, but what about those in between? It surprises them. They're surprised by the blessing he gives to Benjamin. They're probably surprised by the fact that he ran off and came back, but they don't say anything. They go ahead and they have dinner, and you need to know that Joseph could have never sat with his brothers at this time before revealing himself, because for an Egyptian to sit with a Hebrew, it's despicable. Egyptians were the royalty not only of Egypt, but of the world, and they would never sit with disgusting sheep herders. But Joseph sits close enough to serve them. And he serves them all in order of their age. That takes them back. And then he gives Benjamin 5 times more food than all the others. They can't explain it. And historically, we know that the youngest child of a family was appreciated the most. It was probably the last chance, if they didn't have any boys, for their name to get passed on. They appreciated the youth of a family, and they would often celebrate the youth and try to keep that youth young and healthy. So, of course, he couldn't eat 5 times as everybody else, but they don't say anything about that either. They go ahead and eat, they drink, and they enjoy the celebration, and everything's going good. And as we transition from chapter 43 into 44, it's kind of like when you're reading a good book and you just feel good at this moment. You think everything's going good. Then the angst comes. I hate that in a book. My wife loves it in a book, but I hate it. Joseph gives them one more test. He sends them away with all the grain they could ever want, gives all their money back to them, but then he tells the servant, put my silver cup in the bag of Benjamin. I'm thinking, why? Just reunite? It's good. I'm happy right now. Why the angst? I mean, my wife does this in her books all the time. She writes romance books, and guys, it's okay to read romance. So, the couple, they're not together at the beginning of the book, and then something terrible happens. Some great climax. Every good narrative has a climax. It happens, and you expect it, you get over it. The couple comes together. One or both of them come to know Christ as their Savior. You're like, yes. Why is there so much of the book left? But yes, they're enjoying the celebration, and then there it is. Boom. She lays on me some other terrible circumstance. They break up again. Somebody loses a life, and I'm like, no, not the angst. Why put the cup in Benjamin's bag? But he does. And Joseph sends them away, and they're hardly out of town. And Joseph tells his servant now, and it probably had to choke these words out, now go and blame my brothers for stealing my cup. What? So that's what the servant does. Rides on his horse, catches up with the brothers, and he blames them for stealing his master's cup, and they are shocked. Listen to the unison that the Bible tells you. It doesn't say one person spoke up. It says, we responded, or we said. No way! You think we're crazy? The Bible doesn't say that, but that's what they're feeling. Why would we come all the way back to Egypt, 200 miles, and take the chance of losing Benjamin and bring the money back, all to steal one silver cup? In fact, we're so confident we didn't do it. If you find the silver cup in any of our bags, the person in which you find the cup, he will be your slave. The servant says, deal. Wouldn't you know that they find the silver cup in Benjamin's bag? And again, in unison, I can hear the brothers probably scream, wail, weep. The Bible says they tore their clothes as a symbol of mourning. Then they dropped their head, and they all walk back. And in that moment, when they walk back from wherever they were, back before Joseph, I'm sure they're thinking, we blew it. We blew it. The promise that God gave Abraham and Isaac and our father Jacob, who would become Israel, we've ruined it. We're all going to die. My family's going to starve, and our father's going to be dead. But they didn't know that God had a plan. As they appear back before Joseph, Joseph says, what treachery have you done? Again, probably having to choke out those words. And who stands up? Surprising as it would be, who stands up? Judah. Judah stands up. And he says, don't take the one in which you found in the cup as a slave. Take all of us as slaves. Joseph probably didn't expect that, but he's quick on his feet. I mean, he is a leader. He says, no, I could never do such a thing. I will only take the one in which the cup, I'll only take him as a slave. The rest of you can go. Judah again steps up, puts his life in the hands of this Egyptian ruler, walks close, which probably could have caused him to die at any moment, but he didn't. And he asked if Joseph could come a little closer. And he speaks into his ear. He says, sir, you don't understand. Don't do this. The life of Benjamin is connected to the life of my father. He barely let Benjamin come with us. If you keep Benjamin, my father will die. Not only that, but I said that I would be surety for him. My life in place of his life. Then look at what Genesis 43 says. He looks at Joseph in Genesis 44, not 43, Genesis 44:33 says, now therefore please let your servant remain instead of, or in the place of, or as a substitute of the lad. Let me be a slave to my Lord, and let Benjamin go with his brothers. For how shall I go to my father if he is not with me? For fear that I see the evil that would overtake my father. What a gesture. Judah here follows through with the commitment that he gave to his father and says, take me in the place of Benjamin. Now, that's the end of the story. Cliffhanger. We don't know what happens, but for just a second, I want to dig deep into the text and pull out two things that I think illustrate the beauty of the gospel for you and for me. Number one, God changes the heart. You've already seen it in Judah. Makes a miraculous change. Goes from selfish and wicked to willing to give his life. You've already seen the change in Jacob, who didn't see everybody as a son. Now everybody's his son. But did you notice the change in the other brothers so far? Do you remember in Genesis 42, when Joseph was looking for unity, what did they do? They pointed fingers and they threw each other under the bus. Do you remember that none of them would be a leader? None of them would sacrifice? None of them was trusted by their family. Now all of a sudden, Judah is the leader. Instead of speaking apart from each other, they're speaking in unison. Every time that you hear them speak in this chapter 43 and 44, especially 44, they say, no way this couldn't happen. No way we won't do it. When Judah stands up and says, take us all as slaves, none of them argue. All of a sudden, they're unified. Not only is there a leader, not only are they unified, but they're all willing to sacrifice. And now Benjamin and both Jacob trust them. Only God can change the heart. Maybe God's stirring in your heart today. The only victory that we get to say for the brothers or for Judah or for Jacob is they surrendered to the calling of God changing their heart. But have no doubt He changed their heart. If God is stirring in your heart today for real change, to do something crazy like Judah did and to give your literal life for the sake of God's will, listen to that change. It's worth it. If God is doing it, respond to it. Or, like I said earlier, if God's not doing it, plead with Him and trust the gospel that He will do it. And when you don't see Him doing it, trust Him anyway. Only God can change the heart. My question is, yes, there's God changing the heart in Judah. There's God changing the heart in Jacob and the brothers. But is that just an isolated incident? Is that changing of the heart? Can it happen today? I don't want to say yes. And not only can it happen in isolated instances, I believe it can happen to all of you. And the reason it can happen is the beautiful picture that we get next. The second big thing here is Judah. Look at Judah. Judah is the unexpected substitute and the clear seed for the promise. Judah offered his life in place of his brothers. For the sake of his father, Judah offered his life as collateral for his brother Benjamin. And when the time came, Judah fulfilled his commitment by giving his own life as a ransom for the brothers and the children that his father loved. He was willing to become a slave so they could be set free. Oh, if your mind's not running to Jesus, let me encourage it to. Was Jesus not, for the sake of his Father, willing to be collateral, to save the lives of the children that his Father loved? And from the Garden of Gethsemane to the cross, to the grave, to the resurrection, when the time came, did Jesus not fulfill his commitment by being the blood sacrifice and the ransom so that you could be saved, all of you who are children that the Father loves? You have the capacity for change because the greater Son of Judah 2,000 years ago came to this earth perfect. And for 33 years, he lived the perfect life that you could never live, being the best example, the fulfillment of Judah. And he paid that blood ransom. He redeemed you by the price that he paid of God's wrath on the cross. He exchanged his perfection for your imperfection so that one day you could be made perfect if you would believe in him. What Judah didn't do is this beautiful example, Jesus followed through and died. He was buried, and 3 days later, the resurrection happened, and it gives power to both the cross and the payment and the ransom that was paid. It gives power to every promise that the Bible and Jesus has ever given you. And it gives power to these beautiful examples of the gospel in Genesis. It gives power to the reality that all of you today can have a changed heart. God desires that none of you would perish. But he has to do it. And you have to surrender to it. If that is stirring in you today, if this is bringing something out that you never thought before, please, please, be like Judah in this chapter, or in these chapters. Be like Jacob and surrender to that. Trust the change that he's wanting to make in you. Believe in the greater Judah, the sacrifice, the substitute of Jesus Christ for your forgiveness. That same gospel can get you through anything. That's the same gospel that God will use to change the heart of anyone in your family. There's so much more than a moral story here. I pray that in these 2 chapters, there's a lot of information as you leave here today. God would impress upon you that he has a plan for redemption and salvation.